house, so temperature, light, or humidity. But at the same time, they required a constant engagement from their inhabitants, so their participation in domestic rituals, in the ritual of clothing and unclothing home interiors according to the rhythms of nature. And this recurring appearance of textiles in home interiors reflected first and foremost the rhythm of seasonal changes. In houses, including the one that you see now, Oskar and Zofia Hansen house in Shumin, an all-year wooden house by Polish modernist architects from the late 1960s, you could still find such solutions. So you can see light fabrics that helped providing air circulation during heat waves. You can see warmer ones that guaranteed insulation from cold. But also in the middle, a custom-made air down that was hanged beneath the roof to lower the ceiling and prevent the heat from escaping upwards during the winter. But such clothing and unclothing the house according to the rhythm of seasons required an openness to a degree of discomfort. It meant that the inhabitants had to stay alert and sensitive to those very subtle changes that were happening around and constantly care about their surroundings, something that we don't have to do that much in this maintenance-free architecture that we are living now. The house was not a hard shell that cut its inhabitants off from nature and did not allow for full climate control, as contemporary architecture promises us to do. It functioned rather as a resonator, an apparatus that made the inhabitants feel the pulse of the natural world. Textiles have been used in domestic spaces in different cultural and geographical contexts, obviously, but in our research we focused only on Polish examples. The kilim that you can see here and that was displayed at BIO27, now replaced by a movie, served as a legend to our exhibition. It shows 12 phenological seasons, a characteristic of Central and Eastern European climate zone. Those were agricultural seasons that have been recognized in pre-modern Poland and are now slowly disappearing because of the climate change. The swill of the year explains the color code used in the exhibition. Each season has been assigned a color. The summer seasons are accompanied by cool colors and the winter seasons by warm ones. This may sound counterintuitive, but it's not accidental because those colors also visually enhance the effect of cooling or warming up the interiors. And the same colors you will see in a moment repeat in the artworks displayed in the exhibition space. While working on this project, we made an extensive survey of photographs and paintings from Polish museum and library collections. They ranged chronologically from 18th century to even 1980s, as you can see on the photographs by Zofia Rydet of late Polish vernacular houses captured in 1982. The materials we collected indicated a range of seasonal use of fabrics in the interiors. On this basis, we came up with a typology of domestic textiles that were used throughout the year, in different seasons of the year. We never meant to build a complete inventory, that would probably not be possible, but we rather intended to create an overview, and I will now show you a few examples. What you see here are two types of spring and summer fabrics, each illustrated with a drawing by Alicja Bielawska, artist involved in the project, and a historical reference. The first one is muchołap. It's a fabric that separates the interior of the house from outside during heat waves. It protects from insects and provides privacy while ensuring constant air circulation. The other one is baldachin, a bed canopy that shades the bed during sleep so that other occupants of the same space, including animals or plants, can have continued access to light. This pair of photos shows one of our most important constatations, so that the similar types of textiles have appeared over centuries. They haven't changed much. They changed in their appearance, but not in their functions. And they also appeared in different social classes. We found similar textiles, similar types of textiles in manor houses, aristocratic mansions, castles and palaces, bourgeois houses, peasant cottages, and the difference was mostly in their quality. So from cool seasons, you can see here podpinka and narzuta. Podpinka, the one above, is a fabric that lowers the height of a room for the duration of the winter. And this reduces the volume that must be heated and prevents excessive escape of heat upwards. So this is like the air down I showed you from the Shumin house. And narzuta enfolds pieces of furniture and a section of the floor, increasing the thermal comfort of the user. And as you can hear and see on the presentation, we kept their Polish names, and this is also not without a reason, because many nuances related to their function are hidden in the language. Narzuta, for instance, so the lower one, comes from Polish narzucać, which is to throw. And it's not only a textile that can be thrown over furniture to increase the thermal comfort of the users, but it can be also thrown on a human body. And actually it was used that way on the countryside, because in the old peasant houses, it used to be thrown over one's shoulder when going outside. And those names repeat in other textiles, and this relation between textiles and human body is also here visible. For example, zaplecek, the piece above, comes from Polish plecy, which is the back. And this is literally a fabric that warms the wall during winter frost, so that one may lean against it without feeling a chill. Here, of course, you see a bigger one. This is a tapestry from Wawel Castle, so the royal castle in Poland, but we also could find some more modest examples of this type of textile. Chodnik, the last example I will show, so a rug, creates pathways on the daily route of indoor walks around the house. And it literally means something you walk on, because chodzić in Polish is walking. It also points to another important feature of those textiles. Rugs were traditionally made from recycled wool, and it draws attention to gradual phasing out of textiles. In the old days, textiles went through different phases. They first served as clothes, then every last remnant was utilized as a tea towel or a rug. So they had the life cycle of their own within domestic space. That seems also very relevant today. And we translated those and a few more types of domestic fabrics that we found during our historical research into artworks designed by Alicja Bielawska and handwoven by Polish craftspeople. Once inside the exhibition space, the visitor could see all fabrics simultaneously, as if they were in the middle of this wheel of the year that I'll show you at the very beginning. Of course, in real home interiors, they changed cyclically and arrived as and when needed, so you never had this type of setting. But it worked for the exhibition. At the beginning, when we presented this exhibition in London, it was rather conceptual. It was 2021, the middle of the pandemics. It pointed to the benefits of opening up to a degree of discomfort, a discomfort of stepping out from artificially stabilized conditions and becoming more dependent on the natural cycles. But with the current energy crisis, it gained a new actuality, and it became quite pragmatic. So when we showed this exhibition this summer at the National Museum in Krakow, many questions I got from the audience were about how we can actually put those solutions in practice and in use. So this know-how of vernacular ways of shaping domestic microclimates seems to be worth restoring. And we, as the creators of this exhibition, believe that it's a toolbox that may prove useful in unpredictable times. Yes, because all the technologies that we use in our home interiors, they can also only address the problems that we predicted and programmed them for. So we keep expanding this toolbox with new examples. One of them will be presented in a moment at the Lisbon Architecture Triennale. And we keep developing this project. And I will end up with a quote from a book by Jacques Masabo, A Philosophy of Discomfort. Perhaps we could even desire discomfort if we knew how to forge a path through it to a well-being. This was a question posed in this book that accompanied me during the process of working on this exhibition, and I will leave you with that question. I will be happy to expand and reflect on it in our further discussion. So, thank you.
Thank you, Aleksandra. Now we're moving on to our next presenter, Sascha Rösler, who's an architect and architectural theorist working at the intersection of architecture, ethnography, and science and technology studies. He's the associate professor for theory and urbanization and urban environments at the Academy of Architecture in Mendrisio in Switzerland. He will be joining us via Zoom.
Work. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to contribute to this great event. So, I would like to contribute with kind of discussing an image which was widely kind of shared in the second half of the 20th century. It's a photo or a series of photos highlighting a vernacular urban ventilation system, and it's the wind catchers of Hyderabad in Pakistan. Here is the photo that I would like to highlight. You probably know it. It's well known. It has been used and shown by many architects over the course of the 20th century. It's kind of the roofscape of Hyderabad, a photo taken by Swiss photographer Martin Hürlimann during his 2 years travel through colonial India. And as you can see, there are really a great amount of wind catchers all over the cities, of course, with a specific direction. It's a very harsh climate, very hot, very humid, and it allows, of course, to enter the winds from one angle, but not from the other, because the city also encounters quite cold winters. So I would conceive this image as kind of a thermal allegory of the modern energy-dependent society. So there are different takes, different readings, usually without knowing the further context of the city, simply using this image in order kind of to promote a specific agenda related to energy saving, sustainability, etc. So, and in this sense, we could, of course, also see the roofscapes of Hyderabad, the wind catchers of Hyderabad, in the context of another famous iconic representation, thermal allegory, the dome over Manhattan by Buckminster Fuller. Let me quickly give you some kind of intellectual context, how the wind catchers emerged. So the photo was used and redistributed in various publications, but today I would like to emphasize and discuss mainly three publications by three architects of Central European extraction, Ernst Egli, an Austrian architect, Viktor Olgai, a Hungarian architect, and Bernhard Rudowski, born in today's Czech Republic, but also Austrian. So they all had a different kind of approach to the roofscapes, and as you can see, it's kind of an era before the rise of the ecology movement at the end of the 1960s, and it's also a time where air conditioning is, of course, emerging, but not yet fully kind of covering the residential areas, etc., of our globe. So it's kind of an interesting phase. And before continuing with discussing the wind catchers, I would like to show you quickly another example, also highlighting a vernacular approach to the winds, highlighted in Ludwig Hilbesheimer's The New City. It's the old town of Korčula in Croatia with a herringbone structure blocking the cold winter winds, but allowing going through the city the winds of the summer. Or a second example, the first version of the Chandigarh layout developed by New York-based architecture office Meyer and Whittlesey, collaborating with German climatologists Helmut Landsberg, and really trying to kind of, based on empirical insights, trying to develop an appropriate layout for the city. And of course, it's also the time where urban climatic maps emerge. So the idea of mapping the microclimatic diversity of a city for planning purposes. But let me go back to the wind catchers of Hyderabad, Pakistan. Here you see kind of the logic of this system. So every building comprised a number of those wind catchers. So basically, every room had its own wind catcher, as you can see here indicated gray. So Ernst Egli was particularly interested in his book Climate and Town Districts in an urban scale of climate control. And he says people will doubtless build their towns as they would build a home. So really, he tried to rethink the way we are cooling. And of course, the roofscapes of Hyderabad was also an important example for him. Hyderabad is for him an exemplary Indian town, and he speaks of an urban body that is ventilated inside via airlocks. And there are many air channels, as he says, that renew the air in the interior of the town. So this is a quote. And based on a world map with climatic zones, he also tried to kind of extract new types of climate responsive cities. He was in those times very much concerned also with the new technology of air conditioning. So he was asking himself, are the basic town structures of the different climatic zones unchangeable, or can they be changed by technical means of our day and in the end be replaced by a standard town type all over the world? And he developed a quite simple methodology to, on the one hand, consider different climate zones, and then on the other hand, also considering different climatic parameters that have to be considered depending on specific programmatic needs. And based on this kind of overall rationale, on this methodology, he also developed new typologies, new kind of urban structures for, let's say, a city in the flat country of the dry zone, it's here, or a city in the Antarctic with a obviously different typology. And then also the most prominent maybe example that I show also Victor Olga with his famous design with climate, also referring to the roofscapes, the wind catchers of Hyderabad. And he developed a much more, let's say, sophisticated approach to the climate, integrating, again, a consideration of climate zones, but combining it also with state-of-the-art kind of empirical research, modern urban climatology, leading to a kind of synthetic application. And he also made few examples showing a city layout in the hot, humid zone, as he called it. And then the third example I would like to show is Bernard Rudowski and his really famous exhibit and also catalog, Architecture Without Architects, also highlighting very prominently the wind catchers of Hyderabad. So he speaks of the air conditioners of Hyderabad, and Rudowski presents the vernacular ventilation system as a technical accomplishment in the modern sense, against which he juxtaposes the, quote, mania for mechanical comfort. So, and of course, his approach to vernacular knowledge systems has to be seen in the context of the triumph of air conditioning in the US in those times. And in this sense, he tries to, in a very dichotomic sense, to emphasize the timeless quality of those vernacular knowledge systems. And he says, quote, although the origin of this contraption is unknown, it has been in use for at least 500 years. End of quote. However, 200 years after the city's foundation, the wind catchers of Hyderabad had disappeared again. With the construction of an electric power station by the British during the Second World War, the wind catcher literally lost their significance and disappeared. So in other words, right as Rudowski was postulating the quasi-timeless presence of these wind catchers, their real distribution in Hyderabad was already largely a thing of the past. But the media distribution started at that time and took place by resorting to images of the early 20th century, as I showed at the beginning. So I think we should certainly critically reconsider the use of those representation and also deal more thoroughly, more precisely with the context, how and where they emerged, what is the specific role also of a certain image. In this sense, I would also conceive this widely famed project of Master City as a thermal allegory that has to be rethought, and we should more carefully look into, let's say, the existing city structures, also doing maybe ethnographic fieldwork as we did it in Cairo, where we really try to find out how people deal and cope with the harsh climatic conditions. So I think it's necessary to kind of combine bottom-up and top-down approaches. I think there is a value by kind of referring to thermal allegories, but we also need to more specifically the real contexts of these representations. So that's it. It's kind of a simple, let's say, small part of a new book that came out this year, City Climate and Architecture, and also our thoughts on thermal governance are represented in a second book entitled Coping with Urban Climates. Thanks.
Anyways, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sasha. I will now be inviting Zala Velkover, who's Project and Communications Manager at a non-profit urban design studio, Prosto by day, and freelance editor and writer by night. Prosto is a studio which uses a multidisciplinary approach to the challenges of contemporary urban space. They strive to create flexible and playful public spaces in dialogue with the residents and the environment. And if we're ready, Zala, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for the insightful first talks. And first of all, my apologies for all the people in the public who heard some of our insights on hotspots in Ljubljana on Lina conference on Saturday. So I will briefly present our ongoing research, mainly focused on Ljubljana, a city with one of the highest ratios of green space per capita in the world, which kind of serves as an excuse for the municipal government to to not build any new public spaces close to residential buildings, since the two protected green areas are basically hills and forests and cannot be built. However, regardless of the amount of green space we receive, Ljubljana is still a city as every other, where the effect of urban heat island is very visible, as showed in the areas marked with red. And this was kind of our starting point for the research about hotspots in the city. As a non-profit urban studio, we wanted to explore how we can kind of push the discourse about the effect of heat in the city further. We wanted to check whether the scientific results have any effect on the people, on their daily lives, on their daily commutes, because the effect of heat is quite real. During the period of heat waves from 2006 to 2015, more people died from heat in Slovenian cities than on the countryside. And in Europe, heat waves caused more deaths than any other extreme weather event in recent decades. It is nothing new that heat waves will become more frequent and more intense in the future. So, yeah, obviously an important topic to discuss. So what did we do? We built a very, very simple app, promoted it with a simple question: are you feeling hot? Only on the days when the temperatures exceeded 30 degrees Celsius for 1 month. And we got more than, this is the app that we built. People could tap on the map, mark a street, square, parking lot, and tell us more about the hotspot that they chose. How is it, why is it hot there? How do they avoid the heat on this specific location? And a bit more information about the time when it's really hot. So is it in the morning, in the afternoon, etc. We've collected more than 700 hotspots in less than 3 weeks, which is a lot for a city with 300,000 inhabitants. And the very interesting detail of this research is the fact that the hotspots that the people mapped relate to the locations of the urban heat islands, as showed on this map here. Here you can see, does this work? This is the location of the central train station. So on both sides of tracks, there is a high concentration of hotspots. And this is an area that I will focus on. This is the area of University Medical Center, largest medical institution in Slovenia, shown here. Home to 15,000 employees who go to work here every day. and also the location with the highest concentration of vulnerable users of public space. We are not the only ones sensing the problem in this area. This is a headline from a very recent article published this August. It shows nurses from the medical center, and to briefly translate the headline, it's so hot that the babies don't even feel like crying. I will go back to this slide. Just to briefly explain what kind of data we collected. The rich data kind of enabled us to explore more in depth what are kind of the feelings and the effects that people that the heat has on residents of Ljubljana. Just 3 quotations to illustrate my case. This is the location of the train station, hell. This one on one of the most busy streets in Ljubljana. It's impossible to avoid the heat here. I usually choose another route. This is again a location close to the train station, concrete, no green, empty square without any function. The really important part for us was the avoidance strategies that the people explained. Here we could see that people see or even practice interesting strategies such as taking longer routes to go to work, choosing a different source of mobility. I liked what Sasha said before, mania for mechanical comfort was visible also in our research. More people chose to commute by car during the summer instead of by bike, which should be worrying for a city that aims to be carbon neutral by 2030. And for the end of this presentation, I will just allow myself a short digression into the vernacular that we kind of sensed around the University Medical Center. This is a pedestrian path. This is a bench made out of diapers. This is a space for socializing, an ashtray. This is an accessible path to the COVID testing center. And this is actually quite a beautiful example of a brutalist planter constructed out of concrete and sewage pipes. I wanted to show these examples to propose kind of a new terminology, maybe not completely related to climate comfort, but in fact exacerbated by the discomfort caused by extreme weather events. And the kind of working term for this is the new public vernacular, the vernacular that appeared when the welfare state became dismantled and started to disappear. And I'm very much afraid that we'll see more of this in the future. Concluding with this depressing thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Zala. And now I will just invite our last speaker before opening up the debate. Joining us via Zoom is Daniel Barber, Professor of Architecture at the University of Technology in Sydney. His most recent book is Modern Architecture and Climate, Designed Before Air Conditioning. Daniel was recently a senior research fellow at the Center for Apocalyptic and Post-Apocalyptic Studies at the University of Heidelberg. Daniel, welcome.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I trust you can all hear me. Let me just do the little slide share dance here. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So you're seeing the slide. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Great to have this invitation. Really interesting set of discussions. I'm looking forward to our sort of roundtable. I want to say a few things about comfort as a practice, in effect about sort of discomfort as a practice, the conceptual challenge of discomfort as a concept a bit. And I'm going to leave this slide up as I'm talking without really addressing it directly. We can sort of imagine the modes of interaction that these two different facades elicit as kind of emblems of different relationships to comfort, right? Design practices that produce different practices in the interior. On the left-hand side, a kind of a switch, right? A kind of push-button reliance on mechanical systems within a sealed facade, and something of a more dynamic, kind of choreographed relationship to relative comfort on the right. The facade that is kind of initiating these different causes and effects, right? Quite similar, if I may, to some of the, conceptually that is, to some of the sort of clothing of the house that Aleksandra was playing out in her presentation that I found quite inspiring. So yeah, I'll just be leaving this slide up. So I'm interested not only in how we perform comfort, but in how a practice of living and experiencing in the thermal space of the designed interior is developed and trained, right? Imagined and transformed. And how this practice, and of course, this is kind of my main point, how reimagining the practice of comfort has direct impacts on carbon emissions, how it resonates across, how it resonates beyond the thermal interior into the planetary biophysical system, and thereby how a practice of discomfort might allow for a different set of causes and effects, might allow for a future, that is, might open a way through atmospheric disruption. So I'm going to proceed in three parts. Part one, what is comfort? Comfort is not a universal value. It is rather an elite position, an aspiration, a luxury commodity that emphasizes consistency, normalcy, and predictability that allows for increased productivity or a good night's sleep. A collective allegiance to comfort is a form of self-assurance that one is not threatened and that tomorrow will be like today. Comfort is an indication of having risen above the inconsistencies of the natural world, of having triumphed not only over nature and the weather, but over chance itself. Comfort is not universal, to repeat. We can rely on comfort, right? Indeed, that sort of reliance is one of its primary attributes. It is a contingent thermal experience, codified as a norm, reified as a universal value. Comfort is integral, as we've already been discussing, to the designed interiors of over-industrialized countries. It has been, for the last few decades, one of the projects of design. It is essential to the causal chain that weaves together mechanical heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, the fuels that feed them, and the carbon emissions that result. When we turn the dial of a thermostat, that is, we are exacerbating inequity, perpetuating violence, right? Or as the Austro-American architect Richard Neutra put it in 1947, quote, "There has always been comfort in the world, reckless comfort, we could say, comfort based on someone else's continuous labor," end quote. Tomás Maldonado, in his 1987 text, The Idea of Comfort, strikes a similar tone. Comfort is a modern idea, Maldonado argues, and one shot through with the inequities of capitalist forms of developments. So to quote Maldonado, before the Industrial Revolution, the expectation of comfort was the privilege of the few, but the progressive diffusion of comfort to the masses was not accidental. There is no doubt, Maldonado concludes, that it has played from the beginning a fundamental role in the task of controlling the social fabric of capitalist society, end quote. A compelling premise, I think, to map the rise of the socioeconomic system of capital according to the disposition of the thermal interior. The so-called late capitalist world, today dominated by the vectorialist class, values comfort, relies on air conditioning. The two cannot be separated. Or as Peter Sloterdijk puts it, air conditioning is destiny. Both are seeming inevitable fate determined by it, and perhaps more potently, only through air conditioning, it seems, does one have the luxury, the ability to dream of the future. Comfort is this signal of possibility, right, of one's own continuity through to the world of tomorrow. Neutra, Maldonado, Sloterdijk, and others are articulating a broad gesture, to some extent self-evident, when one considers the entanglements of architecture and colonialism, of wars for oil and corporate technological advancements in extraction, processing, and the flow of fossil fuels through the condition-built interior, of the importance, that is, of comfort to the emergence of a late capitalist space as one of excess and expenditure. Air conditioning, quoting Sloterdijk again, quote, "in the literal sense, will establish itself as the main space political theme of the coming era," end quote. As an indicator of equity, it is also perhaps here, kind of across this Zoom connection, right, in the over-industrialized economies of the world, it is also a space for resistance, for reparations, for, as the UN puts it, on slightly different terms, an accounting for loss and damages. Okay, that was part one. Part two, what is a practice? Maldonado continued, quote, with standards more or less formalized, more or less explicit, comfort serves to structure daily life, to ritualize conduct, especially the attitudes of the body. Comfort expresses, still quoting Maldonado, comfort expresses better than any other cultural contrivance the techniques of the body appropriate to modern bourgeois society, end quote. Comfort is a practice, in other words, one that is trained and valued, one that is placed amongst a nexus of practices including labor and consumption, sleeping and eating, desire and longing, of possible satisfaction. The concept of practice, of social practice, has been a crucial figure of thought to explore the changes needed to adapt societies to new conditions of energy use in the face of the climate emergency. Essential to this premise, to this sort of zeroing in on practice as a conceptual space for transformation, is the corollary premise that there is no single template or pattern to which daily life conforms, right? Practice is a way of framing daily life that emphasizes how these patterns and templates are malleable and changeable, learned and relearned, contingent and conditioned. Its sake then in reconsidering the contingent practice of comfort is following here Elizabeth Chauve and Nicole Sperling, examining, quote, the threads of interdependence that hold constellations and complexes of practices provisionally in place, and how and why these threads tighten and slacken, end quote. How can we place the practice of discomfort then in the context of extractive resource imperatives and the premise of economic growth on the one hand, and the attention or not of designers to thermal conditions, to HVAC systems, thermal mass, induced ventilation, et cetera, on the other? In other words, practice frames our placement along the spectrum of comfort as produced over and over through a set of interdependencies, right, that extend from personal habits and interiors to the cultural viability of thermal design principles to policy engagements with resources. Framing these three levels as practices allows us to consider how changes to one thread might allow for some room for complication or tighten the relationship to others. Discomfort then as a practice is not, or not only, the actual experience of discomfort, let's say an unhappy time in a thermal interior, but is rather an aspiration that resonates across at least these three correlated practices. Again, one, the thermal practice of individuals; two, the design practice towards climate adaptation; three, the practicing of policy towards a just energy transition. These are all practices of discomfort. In this way, importantly, a focus on the practice of discomfort addresses but does not resolve the potent entanglement that halts so much of the urgent discourse on social transformation. The entanglement being whether it is an individual or a structural problem. How does what I do matter, right? Through the framework of practice, we aim to connect these seemingly disparate spheres, to draw a causal chain between behaviors inside a building to the policy contexts that encourage a building to be designed as such. Practices, importantly, are distinct from habits. Habits are tacit, relatively unconsidered. As Wendy Hyo-kyung Chun writes, habits, quote, take on a life of their own, independent of the individual, end quote, and are, in this sense, as she puts it, man-made nature. Yet habits are changeable, able to be revealed, they can be analyzed and reshaped. Habits are actions that do not, quote, flow from knowledge, as Chung puts it. Practice, by contrast, is intentional, cultivated, informed. As Gilles Deleuze notes in this context, undoubtedly, as Gilles Deleuze notes in this context, quote, undoubtedly, reason influences practice to the extent that it reveals a connection between causes and effects as means of satisfaction, end quote. Practices reaffirm themselves as they lead to consequences. They are legible, communicable forms of repeated behaviors that structure social aspiration. This legibility of practice, right, the capacity to sort of manage it and change it and engage it, to analyze it and understand it, is its causal resonant power. Okay, part three, quick conclusion. The practice of discomfort. Our world was built according to specific socioeconomic conditions, collective desires, and cultural interests. It will be rebuilt according to new conditions, new desires, and new frameworks for cultural elaboration. Such a reconstruction also reimagines new relationships to resources, economy, exchange, and equity. They imagine new kinds of satisfaction. They rely on the transformation of practice. Comfort has been the aim of design, or one of them. It has not been open to interrogation, experimentation, or speculation. It is a given. Who doesn't want to be comfortable? And yet, the cultural agency of designers can be directed towards exploring discomfort, infusing it with cultural value. As a site for design exploration and elaboration in the coming decades, starting today, that is, discomfort is, again, an aspiration. Only by changing our thermal practices will we have a future. Design tools can reduce reliance on mechanical conditioning, and they can also be compensatory, creative, and instructive. The experience of an object, a room, or a city can encourage and reward the lifestyles, patterns, clothing, and activities that reduce comfort comfortably. A practice of discomfort, referring back here to Deleuze, that reveals a connection between causes and effects as a means of satisfaction. Practicing discomfort then involves revealing and emphasizing implicit structures of ventilation and of violence. It involves exploring the limit of livability, of making discomfort feel better. Not comfortable, of course, but satisfying, of encouraging participation in a changed global thermal regime. It involves recognizing that the past 7 decades of air conditioning has also, or actually, been people conditioning. The practice of discomfort treasures the global collective over the individual. It insists that many of us in the over-industrialized North and Australia can handle discomfort so as to provide opportunities for survival and maybe even self-realization. In short, a future, right? We can handle discomfort so as to provide a future for threatened communities around the world. Amidst this causal chain and our implicit participation within it, the practice of discomfort is precisely not too much to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So this is it for the presentations. We will start the debate now. So I will ask the physically present members to join me up front, and the technical team for the microphones. I think they're already there. Okay, I think this works. So considering that everybody else has been presented, maybe it's only fair to tell you all a bit about myself as well. I'm an architect, but recently I've mostly been working in publishing and communications, either in PR, journalism, and so on, which, full disclaimer, is going to give a certain slant to the tone of this debate. These kind of spaces, panel discussions, are usually an opportunity to expand upon the presentations and the topics therein. I, however, would propose that we go in a different direction. I would like to challenge all 4 of our panelists today to actually distill their thinking into a really concise and easily communicable form. Because we all know about greenwashing. We call it out when we see it, and that's only fair and proper. But I would, as somebody who's slightly skeptical of these sort of events, call upon all of us to not greenwash ourselves for starters, meaning that I can consistently call into question the effect and the reach of these kind of events, regardless of how wonderful and necessary and timely the ideas presented might be. So this is the challenge I plan to pose to the 4 of you today, and I'm really happy to have such a diverse group, and also have Zala here, who actually is somebody who deals with direct action. So yeah, if you're all up for it, I would maybe start from the back with Mr. Barber. I really enjoyed your essay After Comfort, in the richness of its ideas, in the awareness that it brings in with sort of the role of colonialism and its link to comfort. But let's narrow it down. Let's try to make something I can put onto a pamphlet. What would you say were like the 3 key things that we should communicate in order for this shift in the perception of comfort to take place?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I appreciate your sort of interrogation of the format. I might allow it to give me the opportunity to sort of counter-interrogate a little bit, right? Which is to say that, I think part of the importance of events such as this and the sort of proliferation of exhibitions and ideas and books and articles and even pamphlets, right, around the necessity of a kind of shift in approaches of design is to allow for ideas to kind of circulate and germinate, right? And which is to say that part of the value to me of having this sort of roundtable discourse is the kind of, if I may, the kind of anti-pamphlet aspect of it, insofar as we're able to sort of get into some of these issues in some depth. So having said that, I think one of the important, just to play along a bit and say the 3 things, I mean, I think one of the important things is to talk about comfort, right? Is to talk about the sort of challenges that we all face. I give one of the assignments I've given my students is to sort of map their own thermal practices and kind of understand how they're operating within different thermal environments, right? And that sort of self-awareness, I think, is hugely important. I think to think of that from the design perspective, I'm kind of playing on my 3 levels that I started with. From the design perspective, I think to develop means to resist the kind of push towards increasing HVAC, I think especially in the midst, as we still are, of a global pandemic, the kind of push to just kind of turn up the air conditioners, turn up the ventilation systems is still very real, and to find other design means rather than mechanical means to manage these conditions. And then the third thing I would say, and is sort of more along the lines of a sort of policy intervention or sort of protest intervention, to argue, I should say, for architects in particular, designers more broadly, to embrace our role and sort of professional role as advocates for the future of the built environment and kind of argue up, if you will, towards policy analysts, governments, and others to sort of push for different regulations, different systems, reliance on different resources. So even that comfort that we still require within the built environment is drawn from from non-fossil fuel sources. So yeah, I hope that works.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the reason why I opened up in this way is actually comes from the introduction, like the opening part of your essay, the talk of how comfort is a form of self-assurance, is a way of convincing ourselves that there is stability in the world, that we are safe, and so on. And considering that basically what we are proposing as architects, as designers, in a way to the general public, as something that should be put into practice on a massive scale, I think we are facing a considerable challenge given the current state of affairs in the world, because actually the stability and the certainty of things is not increasing. If anything, it's the world is becoming more uncertain. So, of course, my sort of as somebody who kind of is usually tasked with communicating these things and proliferating the ideas, I immediately notice the challenge of actually convincing the public that in the growing uncertainty of the world, they should actually reduce their comfort, thereby opting for even more uncertainty. And one could say, but you actually gave two wonderful points to expand upon by others, because one in the first talking about it and actually encouraging people to notice things which I think was actually a wonderful step in that direction, was the project that Prostodoš and Zala did, this app that actually tries to activate people to pay more attention to their surroundings. And then the second one is about education. So how do we get students of architecture, of design, to actually pay more attention to those issues? So maybe, Sasha, you've have a lot of experience in education. You work as a lecturer. What would your take be on the way we could introduce more of these kind of discussions and the topic, how to introduce it into the curriculum, how to structure it, because we will be looking to the new generation of architects to actually put these ideas that we are developing here and are being developed in academia, to put those into practice.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's a big question. I think in general, it's so important to kind of highlight and emphasize the real complexity of the topic of climate, and also the different scales. So what is really of greatest importance in our work is to kind of overstep a pure focus on individual buildings. So we want to address also in particularly urban scales, and showing different methods how the regulation of climatic condition is a more collective, let's say, process and endeavor. And we try to also emphasize, maybe in the same way as also the other presenters, to emphasize everyday perspectives of the inhabitants. So, sorry, how they go through the day by, let's say, visiting different places depending on the microclimatic conditions. So we work, for instance, with microclimatic walks, also as a method to explore the city, and in a certain way also mimic the way the dwellers, the inhabitants of cities experience the microclimatic diversity. So I think this is really a powerful tool also for architecture students to see the great variety. And of course, there are also very affordable technical devices that can be used and combined with other sensory and multisensory approaches. So to kind of give an overview on the microclimatic diversity. So I think it's really about having different perspectives. So I think it's very important to know the complex history of ideas, as I also wanted to quickly show it in my presentation. And then also knowing planners' approaches to the urban environment and to the environment in general, but also developing this practical understanding of dealing or coping with climatic conditions. So yeah, it's about different scales. I think this is one of the biggest challenge for the planning profession, or the disciplines of planning, I would say. So I think there is a need to kind of integrate different scales, which oversteps the boundaries between, the one responsible for construction, the facade, the one for the building, the other one for the outdoor spaces or the green spaces. So, but rather highlighting the entanglements, etc. So maybe that's the first answer.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I should kind of refocus and narrow it down a little bit, because we all know that as you mentioned, it's an incredibly complex, tangled web of effects and causes and layers and so on. But to kind of simplify it, we are talking about, say, microclimates and moving beyond comfort. So let's say we are sticking with the home. Let's say we are kind of drawing upon the wonderful research that Alex has done, and saying what we are interested in is kind of working on a micro scale. So let's say we want people to move towards using their homes in a way that does not use as much air conditioning, use different ways of regulating it thermally, and to gradually move away from this notion of comfort. Now, one of the wonderful themes from the interviews and the papers from the exhibition, Aleksandra, was this shift that you propose, that is basically a different kind of sensibility. So, it's a type of an opening up by moving away from the cocoon that we have built for ourselves. It's a transition to, one could say, while less comfortable, a more sort of embodied and a more open existence, which requires a mental shift. So maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit on what your research on like this concept, but also how on the questions in Krakow that you mentioned. So that's something I'm particularly interested in. What was it that the people asked you there?
Okay, it relates very much to what Daniel ended his presentation with. So if we want to encourage people to lower down their usual ways of inhabiting spaces and so on, to use less energy and so on, we have to convince them somehow. Yes, since nobody would give up comfort if they don't have to do that, and if they don't see any benefits coming from that. So this is what we wanted to do with Clotted Home, and also with other speculative projects we show on exhibitions. Exhibitions is a very nice format because it's just showing people alternatives with not pushing them yet to do that, but just showing what can come up of that. And in the Clotted Home, we tried to show and to suggest that, of course, we can lower the temperatures in our house, which will happen this winter, yes, because of external conditions, because of new regulations coming in, because of lack of energy sources and the high prices. But we also show them what they can gain out of that. So this is why we underline that much this sensitivity towards the surroundings of the house that we believe over centuries were much more tangible, much closer to the inhabitants who lived according to the rhythms of the nature. Now in centrally heated apartments, you don't see those differences. So that's why we try to also show that in this exhibition that yes, of course, you would give up some comfort, you would give up this control over temperature over any other parameters of the domestic microclimates, but instead you will get this sensitivity, you will get this many subtle changes, you will notice them, you will become more conscious of where you are living. And indeed, when we showed that in Krakow, and this was already knew that this winter will be harsh, suddenly it started to become like a an offer, a real opportunity. So people started in Poland, but also in other countries, look for alternatives. And what we offered was an alternative, but also something that came with benefits. Yes, so they were very interested in that. And it's also important that are not methods that are not familiar for people, and that are not methods that are very expensive, because you have to just go back, I think, 2 generations ago, just to recall the methods that were actually used. Yes, so those are all the things that people knew. People know how to do that. We just recalled them. So that there is this thing that maybe they grandma did, and they can just come back to this way. So.
I like the.
Sorry, can I just jump in for a second with a
Sure thing.
technical? When you're speaking with the mic, can you hold it a little further away? Because I'm getting a lot of interference
Okay,
that I
you
think
can
that
try
would,
that. That's
just kind of like hold it out here or something.
maybe
I think that
like
might
that?
help because
Better? Okay,
I'm having a
so-
hard time following. That's better.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So I really like the notion of offering something. So it's not a demand; it's a proposal. It's almost like a gift, which kind of links to my question to Zala, because in a way, what your work is, for example, with the app, is a kind of an offering. Like you offer to the public an opportunity, the possibility of participating in a process of mapping their own environment, and enticing them to pay more attention to it by enabling them to actually make an impact. You've been working in these kind of campaigns and actions for a while now, so I'm interested in what your sort of experience has been, both in terms of sort of the response that the public has given to you, but then also so moving a step further, what that response has enabled you to do in terms of, let's say, get to the attention of the relevant authorities and so on. So, since I feel like you're the one who has most sort of grassroots practical experience, I'm interested in your take in how to, bring these ideas into action based on your own experience.
Is this okay, Daniel? Yeah? Okay. No, maybe just to begin with, I agree with Daniel that this kind of debates are super important, because even the grassroots activism cannot exist without questioning, reevaluating the context in which we work. So this is why I'm really happy that we're having this discussion now. Maybe to answer your question, the main focus of our project around hotspots and the research that we're doing afterwards is not to really engage the public, but to force the decision makers to change something. So this is kind of only a means to an end, which is a better urban environment. And by better, I will leave this definition open for now. It's a complicated one. But we were just looking for a means to push the discussion further and maybe not to miss the train that is departing really fast in terms of climate adaptation. But I intentionally today didn't want to show the physical, the spatial results of our action because we're not satisfied with them. I showed them yesterday at Lina, but like so far we've achieved only like some meetings with decision makers from the University Medical Center, also from the municipality of Ljubljana. We placed a few benches, but this is nothing.
What are their, can you describe their response, their reaction to this?
I think that their response is...
They don't care?
this is precisely what I wanted to show, the kind of the dark side of vernacular today, because I think that ethnographic research like Aleksandra and Sasha are doing is becoming important, especially this year in a different context, because it's like we can learn from good practices from the past, but we should not forget that vernacular, even the one you researched, like was a reaction to lack of means or to maybe lack of state intervention. Before our discussion today, me and Aleksandra talked about a really terrific documentary, Bloki, which is about socialist housing. But it really nicely shows this relation between individual agency to secure a decent housing and the state intervention. And I think that like just this this relation should be questioned whenever we talk about you know, innovative solutions. When we look back into the past, the relation between the decision makers and the individuals striving for comfort or like to more or less degree, this is what interests me the most.
I see Daniel nodding. Maybe you have a comment in this respect?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it just really helps me to appreciate the sort of dynamism of of all the presentations, really. I mean, it was a really fascinating panel. And I think to really imagine, you know, sort of, well, I guess I would put it this way, to think about, and this sounds a bit idealistic, just so I can say it kind of quickly, but the sort of power of design in this context, right? I mean, the ways in which architects can harness tools of media production, of really sort of helping to show to policymakers, to, you know, urban planners, to people sort of managing these heat islands and other spaces in the city, how design can play a role in transforming those spaces, right? And you know, not that one always sort of gets to the table or that those images will necessarily play a role, but it seems like an important medium for an important opportunity for designers to recognize that we have the kind of media tools to engage in these discussions across policy and sort of broader cultural discourse, at least with some hope for transformation, right? I mean, at least with some hope, I guess.
Can I continue?
Yeah.
No, before this panel, I wanted to challenge Daniel on this, you know, call for more discomfort.
Wait, sorry, can you hold the mic out again?
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. No, I said that I wanted to challenge you kind of against your call for more discomfort. But then I remembered that it's even especially in context of public space, where I sincerely believe that like this aim for more comfort will result in kind of greener, better cities. But then at the same time, I remembered that the comfort can be understood differently, and I think it opened this year, the first air-conditioned street in Dubai. Mm-hmm. So this, you know, mechanical comfort also is gaining prominence in the urban context, and I think that like this is why it's actually really important to discuss what do we even need.
Can I add? I think we should also include the notion of climate change in this debate, because, for instance, in Switzerland, so far mainly winter mattered. Can you hear me?
Kind of.
Not really good?
Not bad.
For me, it's also quite bad. I have an echo now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
More or less, okay. So in Switzerland, we are confronted with increasing temperature rates, for instance, which means to also not only deal with winter conditions, but also with summer conditions, which increases the complexity also of answers, right? That are necessary from an architect's perspective. And I think on the other hand, we have also to take into account that comfort is for vast part of the world not really a topic, right? The majority of people don't live with comfort. They never had it. And so I would also be very careful in overemphasizing the conceptual maybe relevance of discomfort. So it's rather the question, how can we reconnect different microclimatic conditions in a meaningful manner, and of course helping to save energy as well. And that's why I think the urban scale is really helpful to bring different topics in our view. So people go in and out, right, over the course of a day. So, and we can also provide microclimatic conditions outside of an apartment, for instance, which are relevant for several, let's say, inhabitants of a settlement or so. So I think it's necessary to kind of talk about a variety of microclimates and not only emphasizing, let's say, the opposition to comfort in a certain way, because yeah, we want to have comfort during a cold winter night, in particular in one room or several rooms, but maybe less comfort in other part of the building. So it's also about degrees, right? Different degrees and intensities. And I think here I see really conceptual potential also for designing architects.
Yeah, I was about to mention something similar that, again, from the kind of communications point of view, talking about discomfort. Well, it might be counterproductive, but at the same time, it's really not the discomfort we're after. It's this reframing of what it means to live in an environment and in a house, so on. So it's not that we're pushing for discomfort, but for a rethinking of what comfort is. And coming to your text, Aleksandra, so it's moving away from isolation, from disconnection, from this cocooning, and towards a more connected way of more mindful, if we were to use it like such a empty buzzword almost, but it's a more mindful way of inhabiting a space, more embodied.
Also more aware, yes, and I think
yes.
Awareness can be a good word.
Yes.
And yes, so that's why I ended also my presentation with a quote that I feel it's very relevant, because we are indeed talking about discomfort, which is an intriguing word, and I noticed that it catches attention, but not as necessarily at the first moment everyone agreed that this is what we need. But in Jacques Pezemas's book, I found this argument that through opening up to some discomfort, we can invent new kind of well-being, and I think this is what also comes up from our discussion is that, for example, shaping microclimates in the urban space can lead to that it's not about letting everyone have like worse conditions of living. It's rather inventing them anew, start thinking in a new way, so they can be more adapted to current climate situation. And I agree very much with what Sasha just said, that it's important to think in this urban scale. Yes, so our project is about this domestic space. It shows what an individual can do, but of course, individual would not cope with climate crisis and cannot be burdened with that. Yes, so it's more about systemic changes. So we would just point to a problem. We point to what you can do in your space, how it can, why you shouldn't like maybe oppose opposed to those changes, but of course we rather would rely on systemic changes, new law introduced the cities and their administrators to propose certain solutions, because without that, by clothing home, you would not save the world.
Yeah, so of course, by focusing on sort of the individual home and so on, we definitely want to kind of avoid this consumer blaming and transfer of responsibility onto the individual, as we've done with recycling and customer habits and so on. I am still, however, kind of interested in the potential for introducing this change into everyday life as a means to develop a sensibility that will then activate also people to put pressure onto governments. So I see a parallel here, actually, because both require a certain activation. Comfort passivizes us both inside our personal physical space as well as the public social space. That's where I see an interesting correlation. So how a transformation of the way you inhabit your own apartment can lead to a transformation of how you interact with public space, how you kind of conceptualize your own role in society. I could say, like, I'm looking for catalysts, right? Like the small thing that can lead to an amalgamation of ideas and habits that can break through these established patterns that we live in and maybe want to break out of, but don't know how. Which is also a thing, right?
It's good, and this is what we wanted to achieve, to open up people's imagination, that there are many ways they can go. It's not, it's also what we discussed earlier and what Daniel wrote about in his After Comfort essay, that it's all about changing the way of thinking. Yes, so if that can happen, and that should happen also on an individual level.
So, which just leads me back to earlier. I asked you what the questions in Kako were, and I don't think we ever got to that point. But I'm still interested. What were the people in Kako asking you about?
About specific types of textiles, especially those ones for the winter season, because there are simple solutions they can introduce in their own houses to insulate them better. Yes, just to, for example, not to have energy escape through the holes in the windows or through the doors and so on. So they asked about, like, what's, for example, what they should pay attention to. Yes, for example, like this piece that I showed that lowers the height of the ceiling. It's very easy to introduce. You don't have to have an elaborate shape. It's just about hanging something a little bit below. Curtains that are at the doorstep that can also isolate and help temperatures to stay in the house, not get outside when you enter the house, for example. So they were interested in particular examples in how they work, but they also just recalled them, that they remembered that they found that in their grandparents' homes. So that was, just a refresher of a memory that it's not difficult to do, that one can do that by themselves from things that they have at home. But of course, they were also very interested in the designs that Alicja Bielawska proposed, because this exhibition is composed also of very nicely designed objects. So, so they also saw some potential in just buying them. Yes. So.
I was about to ask if anybody asked when they can get that at IKEA. Yeah.
Of course, but now it's an exhibition object only, so we will see.
Okay. How, Anja, how are you?
Can I just jump in? Oh, sorry.
Please.
Can I just jump in for a second around this question of discomfort for a minute, which, I do so ambivalently, and I've been sort of juggling this term, with kind of excitement and ambivalence the past, I guess, few years. And first of all, to clarify that, the premises I tried to play out briefly in these comments today, it's really a figure of thought that's focused on what I refer to as the over-industrialized countries, right? I mean, certainly affirming Sasha's interjection that, most of the world does not have the pleasure of comfort, right? And it's a very much a different set of issues. But I think it's in fact just that. I mean, I think what Aleksandra was just describing, and I really love the project, is in a sense about the sort of pleasures of discomfort, if you will, right? I mean, the kind of rituals and practices that one can engage in when we kind of approach comfort across the kind of broader spectrum, right? And kind of understand sort of where we can place ourselves according to different practices, according to changes in the climate, according to different collectives, different spaces in the room, et cetera. So really, just this sense of understanding how seeing discomfort as a practice, as I'm trying to frame it, offers opportunities to kind of see it as an aspiration rather than as a kind of sensory experience, right? That we kind of, in the global north, so to speak, aspire to be less comfortable so as to kind of allow for a certain amount of climate reparations, right? Allow for a certain amount of loss and damage, as the UN calls it, back to the global south, right? So I think to de-emphasize, although it's still important, the actual experience of discomfort, to recognize that sort of allowing ourselves to try to be discomforted has all sorts of resonances across kind of political, climatic, carbon, and kind of future possibilities, right? Yeah. Keep it like that.
Anja, I think we're out of time. I can see Anja looking at me. So maybe I would just open it up to the audience if there is any questions before we get way too. We have. So okay, wonderful. So there is a question from Janja from online for Zala. She's asking if you presented the hotspot results to the municipality and if they have followed any of your suggestions.
We've presented the results to the municipality. We've presented them to the media, and anyone can find them on website wroce-totke.info. We also, what I didn't show today, we also, for the locations that were pinned the most, we've created kind of prototypes of solutions for cooling down these locations, but at the same time, like really clearly stating that this is not enough, that the city should be planned in a different way if we want to achieve comfort during summer. Sorry, Daniel. So yeah, all these results were presented. I think that like really our mini research is not as important as the urban heat island research, which was done by the scientific academia, and it's really, really serious and should be taken seriously. And the map I showed was done in 2014. So this is actually why we even did the research in 2020, because since 2014, nothing happened. You're like, what are they doing? What's going on with these results? You know, you have them already.
Okay, so the flesh and blood audience.
I mean, I agree with both the fact of the systematic changes, but I think that to actually develop agency within citizens is super important. So I'm wondering if, in addition to the idea of actually mapping and saying, okay, today is too hot, is there a way in which you imagine developing the app whereby, I mean, I don't know, but it's like, today is too hot, and but you could actually, as a citizen, maybe decide not to have the electricity going all the time, or having, like, do something, like, so that also as a citizen you actually realize that it is up to you. Because I think that if we leave it to the government, I mean, there's an idea of pushing for an agency of the citizen, but also the citizen taking direct action in his home. So are you looking at integrating that in any way?
Well, this was actually the last page of the survey in the app, was what can you do to cool the city down? With a few tips. One of them against mechanical comfort, so against air conditioning. Maybe I will connect your question to what Bor asked. How can you really, how can you kind of merge the individual and the policy level, especially in cities? I think that to provide more comfort with really good provision of public space also kind of lessens the demand within home. So this would be my answer, that like both of these two aspects should always be connected. So yeah, of course there is some actions that individuals can take, but there also needs to be provision. It's easy to say to people, don't use the car. You know, it's bad for the environment. But if there is no provision of public transport, where like people are really left with no choice.
Any other questions? Comments from our panelists? Well, in that case, I would just like to thank all the panelists, all the guests, all the ghosts in the machines around the world following us through the internet, but also our supporters, the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Slovenia, the Municipality of Ljubljana, the Polish Embassy in Ljubljana, and a special thank you for a wonderful collaboration during the whole duration of BIO to the Adam Mickiewicz Institute in Poland. The BIO27 Super Vernaculars book will be published soon, and it will be available for purchase at the MAO online store and distributed by Ideas Book. There will also be a special event in November in London in collaboration with the Royal Academy of the Arts. As this is the closing event of the Biennale, we sincerely thank everybody who exhibited and participated in BIO, the BIO Advisory Board, all of our supporters, visitors, guests, and so on. Hereby, the BIO27 is concluding. We would invite everybody for some refreshments. One final guided tour with Anja Radovic and Nusha Zupans at 3 p.m. Or just an individual viewing of the exhibition while you still can. So thank you again to everybody. Thank you, Daniel, Sasha. And let's have a drink.